Okay, if you were around in 2008, it was a scary time. I was living in the UK back then, and there'd been rumblings in the media about issues with the financial system for months. And then, in late 2007, there were queues outside branches of Northern Rock, a British bank that had just failed. And I remember that the news was full of really anxious-looking people standing in long lines hoping that their savings hadn't just disappeared. Now, I was working in a bar at the time, and a lot of the people just stopped coming in, which meant fewer hours and lower wages for all of us who worked there. So the effects of the crisis made themselves felt pretty quickly, and everyone was kind of worried that it might all get even worse. And then, in 2008, big US financial institutions started to go down, culminating with the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September. And when the newspapers started calling that day Black Monday, it did actually begin to look like the whole financial system might collapse, and we'd be faced with empty cash machines and credit cards that no longer worked. You know, it still makes me shiver when I think about what might have happened if all of that had come to pass. Now, politicians and central bankers were able to rescue the system by, well, basically flooding it with money, but we still live with the after effects of 2008 nearly 20 years later. But do you want to know the really scary part? It could happen again at any moment. Because, fast forward to today, Meta just laid off 10,000 workers by email at 4 a.m. Even for those with a good job, economic security, it just doesn't exist anymore. Living costs are already at all-time highs, while wages are stagnant. Sure, the stock market's at a record high, but we all know that markets are cyclical. So it's just a matter of time before everything crashes. So if you're one of the millions of people struggling, we're telling you today how to prepare for the economic crash that's coming sometime. We're a team of financial experts with experience across everything money, from banking and Wall Street investing to traditional assets and even crypto. And, crucially, we've seen an economic crash up close. My name is Guy. This is Money Bureau. Let's get going. Right. Let's start with the reason that everything sucks right now, and that is inflation. As money is being constantly printed to support the economy, that same money is constantly losing value over time. And what's scary is that we're often led to believe that the impact is minimal when the reality is a lot more severe. For instance, just take a look at the US dollar. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the dollar has lost more than 90% of its value. So if you bought something for $1 back then, that same thing would cost you over $33 today. But even if you have a job that pays well enough to cope with the effects of inflation, there's also the constant threat of layoffs, and you've probably seen how entire departments can get cut overnight, leaving workers totally blindsided. And it's happening right now. By April this year, major companies like Volkswagen, UPS, Oracle, Amazon, and Dell have laid off tens of thousands of workers each. And when Meta laid off all those workers by email, classy touch, by the way, Zuck, that amounted to 10% of its workforce. But remember, that fear hits everyone, not just the people who lose their jobs. In fact, job insecurity spreads among employees long before actual job losses kick in. And before long, your colleagues start updating their resumes. People go quiet, they stop taking risks, and they start making decisions driven by anxiety rather than logic. But I guess what makes today's economy so terrifying is how little room for error there is. Your savings that were meant to be a cushion get eaten away by inflation, rising costs, and, just everyday life. And when there's no buffer, just one unexpected expense like a car repair, a medical bill, a broken boiler can trigger missed payments, rising debt, and some really difficult decisions. And this isn't hypothetical either. Millions of households are just one bad month away from real financial strain. 37% of Americans say they'd struggle to pay a $400 medical bill. And that's while we're not yet in an economic crisis. So, if you're lying awake at night running numbers in your head, wondering how on earth you're going to make ends meet, then you're not alone. But here's the real kicker. That panic is your single worst enemy in a crisis. The very worst financial decisions, like panic selling assets or taking on high interest debt, they happen when people are at their most scared. So that's why your best course of action is to stay calm and have a backup plan ready, like the one that we have for you today. Oh, and if you want to see more ways to get rich or protect yourself from getting poor, then be sure to sign up to our weekly newsletter, by the way. The link is in the description. Okay, now, if an economic crisis leaves you short on cash, then your instincts will probably tell you to cut out everything that's not strictly necessary. And while that impulse does come from the right place, it almost always backfires. Your uncle might think he can white-knuckle his way through a crisis by cutting everything and living in the shed eating beans, but he's inevitably going to snap at some point and spend more than he saved. That's why your goal isn't total austerity. No, it's to cut out what doesn't matter while keeping life tolerable. Start with the waste. Americans already spend real money on things they never use, and the EPA estimates that food waste alone costs a household of 4 nearly $3,000 a year. Apply this method across the board then, and you're bound to find money you might not even have known that you were losing. That forgotten gym membership quietly billing you $50 a month. Drop it. Insurance policies you're overpaying for. Sayonara. $80 phone plans with data you never use. Hang up. Software renewals for tools you haven't opened in months. Cancel subscription. And the best thing about cutting these things out is that there's no emotional attachment. You can cut them completely without any real sacrifice. And instead of your hard-earned money leaving your account for no good reason, you'll instead create an instant cash flow relief without affecting your quality of life. Now, after you've cut out the waste, your next step is to review your low-value spending. But do be careful here, because not everything non-essential is the enemy. Instead of asking whether something is strictly necessary, ask one simple question. Does this genuinely improve my day? If that small spend is, say, a $5 coffee that you can't function without, then keep it. If it's a Netflix subscription but you watch Netflix every night, then keep it. But that random Tuesday takeaway because you couldn't be bothered to cook, well, maybe cut that one out. Because by making these intentional choices, you're not placing constant restrictions on yourself that slowly grind you down. And, wherever possible, look for ways to substitute what you're cutting rather than losing them entirely. So, that random Tuesday takeaway you cut out, well, cooking at home doesn't have to be a miserable, joyless experience. Well, unless it's me doing the cooking, of course. You see, you could easily learn a few recipes that actually taste good and cost a fraction of the price. Even switching your food shop to supermarket own brand items doesn't have to feel like a defeat. In fact, it can save you up to 30% off your shopping bill, adding up to thousands of dollars over the year. And by buying essentials in bulk, you can reduce your exposure to future price spikes. Now, these small adjustments to your daily spending habits can add up to meaningful savings over time without you even noticing. But the most powerful thing you can do is to stop relying on willpower entirely and build simple systems that work instead. Willpower, after all, is a finite resource. Eventually it runs out, especially under stress. But a system keeps working even when you're tired, distracted, or overwhelmed. So, set yourself a weekly spending cap rather than trying to ban spending entirely. Give yourself one guilt-free treat each week. You've earned it, after all. And most importantly, plan your bigger spending decisions once a week instead of making them in the moment. By building these small structures, you can reduce impulsive decisions and save yourself a lot of money over time. But above all else, there's one thing that's really important. You need to protect your mental health. Making your life tolerable, even just a little bit, isn't about indulgence, it's about how you survive. But what happens when an economic crisis leaves you broke? Well, almost everyone who's broke makes the same mistake, trying to keep everything the same. The same lifestyle, but with less money coming in. And honestly, that's human. No one wants to admit that they're struggling. But that approach only ever makes things worse. So, if you're broke, survival comes first. And that means keeping your bare essentials covered no matter what. Everything else can wait until you're back on your feet. Now, of course, your very first priority is your home. Losing your home can have consequences that follow you for years. You'll have more stress, less focus, and harder work days as you try to rebuild. Your next priority is food. It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised. In 2024, it was revealed that over 40% of adults skip meals entirely when they're struggling so their kids can eat instead. It's heartbreaking, really. But here's what isn't so obvious. Food insecurity disrupts the way your brain functions. It triggers chronic stress, it makes decision-making harder, it hurts your focus, it weakens your memory, and it creates anxiety. Your brain goes into survival mode. So, make no mistake, food isn't something you can afford to sacrifice, not even in a crisis. Everybody's got to eat. Now, your third priority is your core utilities: electricity, heating, water, your phone, and the internet. Despite what you might think, these are essential. Losing internet access doesn't just mean you can't get onto Facebook. It can literally cost you your job. Likewise, losing your phone connection means missing opportunities and struggling to access support. Transport is your fourth priority, whether it's a car, a bus pass, or whatever gets you to and from work. If you cut transport costs too aggressively, then you risk cutting off the very opportunities you need to stay afloat. So the goal here isn't convenience, it's simply getting you to the place that pays you and back again. But here is why all of this really matters. You see, humans function better when we feel more stable. When we know the roof above us is secure, the fridge isn't empty, and the lights are still on, our brains aren't forced into survival mode and they can actually function. Because then you'll be able to make better decisions that actually improve your situation. So prioritizing essentials isn't just about protecting your finances, it also protects your mental health. And make no mistake, your mental health matters just as much as your physical and financial health. Anything that isn't essential can wait. Okay, it's time for something that nobody really wants to think about. If the economy crashes, your biggest fear will be losing your job. And look, if that's already happened to you or feels like it might soon, then the first thing you need to hear is this: it wasn't a personal failure. Now, this usually happens because a company decides to restructure, which we all know is just business talk for cutting jobs to save money. It's driven by market forces that have nothing to do with your ability or your worth. High performers get laid off every single day, so don't go feeling that decisions were made because you were somehow less valuable than anyone else. That said, the worst thing you can do is let that emotional weight slow you down. So let's get practical, because having a clear plan is genuinely the fastest way to start feeling less overwhelmed. And more importantly, though, it puts you back in control of your financial future. So step one is figuring out your runway, and this takes a bit of focus. So grab a cup of tea, a pen and some paper, and sit down. Strip all your costs down to the bare essentials, things like housing, food, utilities, transport, and work out how many months you can cover with what you have right now. Don't think about lifestyle spending or what you used to spend. Focus only on your basic survival costs. Even if you work out that your runway is smaller than you'd like, simply knowing is infinitely better than not knowing. And by doing this, you've just replaced raw panic with a problem that you can actually work with and begin to solve. Now, step two is to cut back quickly and deliberately. The sooner you do it, the longer your money lasts. And every extra week you buy yourself is another week to find your footing again. So pause anything non-essential. Those can come back later when things improve. Now, this means cutting as much spending as possible, not trying to perfectly optimize every single thing. But making these cuts isn't admitting defeat, and there's no shame in it. These temporary cuts are just that, temporary. More importantly, though, these strategic cuts ensure you stay afloat, even as the wider economy crumbles around you. And this leads us to step 3. Apply for support as soon as you possibly can. Again, there's no shame in doing this. It's exactly why these systems exist in the first place. Unemployment benefits, housing assistance, utility relief, healthcare support, temporary debt help, whatever's available in your country, apply for it sooner rather than later. People often delay doing this out of pride or discomfort or the belief that they'll find something quickly and everything will just be okay again. But delaying costs you time, and as they say, time is money. In fact, time is the single most valuable resource you have right now. So don't be afraid to use what's available. It's not a sign of weakness, it's good, sensible decision making. And this brings us to step 4, the job search. Now, treat the job search like a job itself. Set real working hours and show up every day. Stay consistent and apply in volume. Sending out more applications is better than only a few perfect ones. That said, though, it does help to make your CV as strong as possible, and there are plenty of free templates out there that you can use if you're struggling. But if you can have a solid CV ready to go and you're applying widely, it won't be long before somebody bites. And until you're back on your feet, be willing to temporarily widen what you're looking for. A role slightly outside your comfort zone, or even a short-term contract that covers the bills while you keep searching, is better than nothing. It's cash flow, and cash flow buys you options. So stay flexible, stay active, and stay visible. And finally, step 5 is to protect your confidence, and this one matters more than you might think. Job loss can quietly break your routine, your sense of purpose, and your very belief in yourself. But there's a practical issue that comes with that. Confidence affects everything. It shapes how you come across in interviews, how proactively you network, and how quickly you can bounce back. So make sure you keep some structure in your day-to-day life. Stay connected to the people closest to you, and don't forget to get out and touch grass once in a while. Do something each day that reminds you of your own capability. And this isn't optional self-care fluff. It's a core part of your recovery strategy. Sure, you've hit a setback, but that's all it is, and setbacks are temporary. Okay, now we've covered some pretty tough ground in this video. A lot of the things we've talked about sound difficult, but are surprisingly easy to implement. So let's now flip the script a little with something that sounds simple, but is genuinely hard to do in a crisis. The single most powerful financial decision you can make is to stay calm and avoid making rash decisions. Now, the reason this is easier said than done is because economic crashes create enormous pressure to act fast. Your instincts push you to do something, anything, just to feel a sense of control over what's happening. And this is why 1 in 5 people say they've made panic-driven financial decisions. Now, when panic takes over, the brain focuses on right now and not later. And that's when people do things like selling long-term investments at the wrong time or reaching for high-interest debt just to get through the month. And in the worst cases, some people even cash out their retirement savings early, triggering hefty penalties and losing years' worth of compounding growth. Here's an example. If you withdraw $10,000 early at, say, age 45, your plan must withhold $2,000 for federal taxes. Then, at tax time, you'd also owe a $1,000 early withdrawal penalty. So you'd end up with about $7,000 before any state taxes are taken out. Now, that's a huge chunk, and obviously, the more you withdraw, the more you lose overall. So these are the biggest financial mistakes anyone could possibly make in those circumstances, and are guaranteed to follow these people around for years, long after the economic crisis itself has passed. So if you're facing a decision that feels urgent but also irreversible, that's your signal to pause. The last thing you want to do is make any of the decisions I just mentioned, because temporary hardships, as brutal as they can feel, do eventually pass. And you don't need to solve everything right now. You just need to stay resilient so that when conditions do improve, and they will improve, you emerge out the other side stronger. And here's something that might surprise you. You don't need a perfect plan to make things better. You just need a plan. And think of it this way. You might not have full control over the situation, but you can control how you respond to it. So here's a simple framework you can come back to anytime things feel overwhelming. First, protect your essentials. Second, preserve your cash flow by cutting waste and not joy. Third, avoid any decision that permanently reduces your future options. Fourth, review your situation on a weekly basis. And fifth, only adjust your plan when your actual situation changes. So yeah, it really is that simple. And you'll notice that it's mostly what we've covered already today. And if you can stick to this consistently, it'll keep you grounded and out of the kind of reactive spiral that turns temporary pain into years of financial struggle. And finally, I want to leave you with this. Economic crashes are scary, but they're temporary. Every single one in history has ended, and this one is no different. Remember, your greatest asset isn't your savings account or your investment portfolio. It's your ability to stay level-headed when everything else feels like it's falling apart. Protect that, and you'll be okay.